It was really selfish, to be very honest. And sexuality it continues to be and was a very important part of the work I do because there's a history of sexual abuse in my childhood. But that feeling, that feeling is also inside, but also comes from a lot of people outside who make you feel like your life has ended. And at 30, at such a young age, feeling like you have no future, that your only future is your child now. I think the one thing I really try to focus on is not labeling. I think traditional psychoanalytics has focused for many, many years on labeling or diagnosing. And while that has really helped us, as a species, I feel like it also limits looking at someone as a diseased person, whereas anything anyone has gone through is also a systemic issue. So I try and be mindful of bringing in perspectives that are often contrary, but also leaving wiggle room for doubt.
Hi, welcome to the Mohua show. My name is Mohua Chinappa and I am an author, entrepreneur, and ex-housewife. This podcast is about everything from business to technology to arts to lifestyle, but done and spoken ईमानदारी से. Hi, in today's episode, we have the privilege of hosting Reema Ahmad, a multifaceted individual whose expertise spans neuro-linguistic programming, counseling, and advocacy for sexual and reproductive health rights. So, wow. As a co-founder of Candidly, she has ignited crucial conversations on gender abuse, sexuality, also pioneering initiatives like Equality, India's first gender-neutral clothing line. Reema's journey is a testament to her commitment to empower communities through education and dialogue. Woo! Welcome, Reema, in today's podcast.
Thank you, Mohua. It's my pleasure to be here.
Absolutely my pleasure too. It's an honor to have you. So, to begin with, can you just share with our listeners what inspired you to delve into the field of neuro linguistic programming and counseling? Particularly with a focus on sexuality and gender, and given the fact that you're, from a community where I don't think this is really encouraged too much, uh,
Yeah, yeah.
made you.
I mean, I don't, I don't know for other people, but a lot of people have their like professional route mapped out. By the time they're in their 20s, I had no clue what I was going to do till I was about well into my 30s. So my journey into neurolinguistics and counseling and sexuality based issues all started because I was going through a lot of turmoil in my personal life. I had been in turmoil through my teens, after I got married in my early 20s, after I had my child, and then separated and divorced. And all of that led to such a clouding of, function of a sense of self that started reading and started learning. And that's when I chanced upon a course on neurolinguistics by my teacher, Bhavna Nisima. She's still my teacher, I still learn from her. And that sort of introduced me into this new way of looking at myself, which then made me realize, oh, you know what, I'm good at this, and I can make an impact while also improving how I feel about myself. It was really selfish, to be very honest. And sexuality it continues to be and was a very important part of the work I do because there's a history of sexual abuse in my childhood. There's a lot of history of abuse in my marriage, and you grow up seeing a lot of that, experiencing a lot of that in our communities, in all communities in India, across the world also, irrespective of whether you're a boy or a girl. And those in turn impact your big life decisions, like what are you going to do, who are you going to marry, what partners you choose, what work you take. And that realization sort of made me understand that this is important and led to a very conscious choosing of study.
Rima, it must not have been easy at all. To say at the age of
Yeah,
30, so obviously it was many, many years of battling with things that you're
many
not
years.
cognitive about. And so just
Yeah.
to go back, into maybe some incidents that you remember has been really let's just say the catalyst for you to recognize that you probably need to do this whole work with yourself. So can you just take us back
um
into that?
Sure, sure, sure. I think right after my divorce, there was this sense that life has ended, which, safely 10 years later, I can only say that it has just begun, not ended. But that feeling, that feeling is also inside, but also comes from a lot of people outside who make you feel like your life has ended. And at 30, at such a young age, feeling like you have no future, that your only future is your child now, and you have to sort of give up a lot of who you are, especially as a woman, your sensuality, your needs, your choices. And that made me feel like this can't be it. It was such a dark time. I cannot tell you. I mean, people who knew me in college did not recognize me when it had happened. That was how drastic the change internally and externally was. And it forced me to acknowledge that something's going on, especially when I was not being a good enough parent. I could see that my behavior was impacting my child. And that made me see that, what, if you have to undo or do a better job at being a parent than what your child has been exposed to through your marriage, then you need to pick up your pieces and you need to learn and you need to begin. And that's where that work sort of began, through my own self and changing practices, changing attitudes. And then, of course, really training to become a professional. It took a long time.
My God, it just sounds so,
Yeah.
so, so scary because picking up the pieces on your own is one of the most difficult things that a person can navigate. That whole.
But yeah. But then we never really on our own, are we? We get support from many places, friends, family, community, and some people lesser than others. But yeah.
So let's just talk a little bit about being a certified practitioner in trauma work and narrative therapy. So how do you approach counseling individuals who've experienced abuse or trauma while they consider their unique backgrounds and adaptive mechanisms? How do you go about addressing all of this?
I think the one thing I really try to focus on is not labeling. I think traditional psychoanalytics has focused for many, many years on labeling or diagnosing. And while that has really helped us, as a species, I feel like it also limits looking at someone as a diseased person, whereas anything anyone has gone through is also a systemic issue. For example, abuse is a systemic issue, or gender-based violence is a systemic issue. Widespread violence against women or patriarchal issues that men suffer from are all systemic issues that are intersectional. They're working at many, many levels. So to say that someone shows up in your clinic to say that, oh, I'm going through this, and then diagnose that person as an anxious person or a depressed person is really putting a microscope on it and missing out on the larger picture. That is one thing I try to bring in through my training as a systems coach also, to bring in ease in how people look at themselves as not necessarily diseased or diagnosed as something, but as someone who is suffering the impact of the environment they're in. That works in a twofold way. It helps people find some relief where they don't feel like, oh, I'm sick, I'm going through all of this, which also means I have some agency to change some of what I'm feeling, maybe through changes. And it also places responsibility where it belongs. For example, there's a lot of noise around self care and self love these days. And while that works, it's a very small part of how people can feel better, because we are relational beings. We heal or feel loved or through our relationships and interactions with our environment and the people around us. So that is something I really try to bring in into all my counseling work, trauma work, people who have gone through abuse, because you are never really alone in experiencing what's happening. It is a result of many, many, many things happening together.
My God, that must be so overwhelming for so many people because once they realize that they've been part of a huge chain that has actually also taken this entire um, space of being quiet sometimes when they've been abused or not even acknowledging sentiments. It must be so
Yeah.
overwhelming to deal with so many people who come to you, Reema. So
It is overwhelming. It's overwhelming. I will not deny it. But it's also, it makes one feel like there is maybe 1% or 0.1% that you can do in holding space for people. Because when issues are systemic, you can't eradicate them completely. You can offer some relief. So it's exhausting, it's humbling, but it's also strangely empowering to say, okay, if this is taken away from others, this is what I can offer, which is a safe space and compassion. So it's a double-edged thing, I think.
So, Reema, your dedication to comprehensive sexuality education is evident, from your involvement with organizations like Tarshi, and also your certification in their course. So, tell us a little bit about, Tarshi. What is it that you do there, and how?
So
Yeah, and how would you do this widespread implementation? Because it's a very, very sticky subject.
yeah, it is a very sticky subject. It's also very controversial, and most people are not open to it. You'd be surprised that even there are assumptions, say, around economic background, that if you go to affluent neighborhoods or affluent schools, people will be more open, and that can surprisingly be wrong sometimes. So it's a very tricky area because there's so much socialization around sexuality or what sexuality education is. So Tarshi is it's an acronym for talking about reproductive and sexual health issues. It's an NGO that was founded in Delhi, and I think they are close to their 30th year, or have they crossed their 30th year? And I feel like there are many such organizations in India, but they're doing beautiful work because they bring in a lot of pleasure, positivity, while empowering children, families, teachers, schools to help children understand their bodies, not just through the spectrum of sex ed or puberty or relationships, but also the spectrum of orientation, of bullying, of abuse, what are friendships, what kind of friendships can be dangerous, and so many aspects. And they also do beautiful work in offices around, posh and Bosco. So much. They just, and a very, very warm team, very inclusive team made up of all sorts of age groups and genders. So I've had the best time training with them, and the beauty of their courses is that they are flexible. Most of them are online, so anyone can really take it. And I had no intention or idea, formed before I took the course, that this is what I'm going to do with it. It was just a very lost kind of period in my life, and a very dear friend of mine who's actually been a work partner for very long, Amita Malhotra, she's been associated with Tarshi, and she said to me, why don't you do this? This is, you're exploring working as a child sexual abuse awareness person. Why don't you learn this? And that was like the building block. And I feel like no one person or institution or organization can really do widespread implementation because it has to go at many levels. So if you just empower children, they're going to go back home to parents who from the same culture or who have the same kind of mental blocks around sexuality or gender or abuse awareness, and it won't work. And if you teach them that in families, they may be going back to schools that may not be open to, ideas of talking about bullying, talking about puberty, all sorts of things, right? So the way the Ashi really works is they try, and if they're working with children, they look at the family, they try to bring in the family as well, they try to bring in the school as well, or they're just, empowering individuals through these courses where they can learn in a multi-pronged way. So if I'm learning as an educator, I'm also learning as a parent, I'm also learning as someone who may have gone through certain things in life, right? So that's the beauty of their work. But I would say that we're all very honestly limited, and I'm not like an influencer. I'm not a very, a person who has a lot of outreach because I work mostly one-on-one with people, and it's limited to, say, my client rooms. But that said, one can try through self education and bringing in the awareness of sexuality education for people like me who are coaches or counselors into the practice room. You can change a lot. But for others who may be, say, heads of schools or teachers or people who are really connected to more number of people, it can be a very powerful tool.
So let me also congratulate you on the release of your book, Unparenting. Wow, what a title, sharing awkward truths with curious kids. So tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about the inspiration behind this book and the message that you want to convey to your readers.
If I was to be honest, the inspiration behind the book is actually landing up in a big mess as a parent. and feeling like I'm doing such a bad job and I need to do better. And that whole feeling of lostness, especially since I've been a single mother for more than around 11 years now. And I have a boy, he's nearly 16, and there are not many boys in my family. And the kind of family that I grew up in, and the kind of boy I'm raising was really rebellious and outspoken. And naturally, also like that, put me in a place where I really didn't know what do I do with him. And coupled with that were my own experiences of being brought up in a traditional family household where respect and obedience had was on a very high premium. And I saw that it had benefits, but it also had tremendous disadvantages for the individual, for children especially. So when I became a mom, I was very conscious of the fact that I want to be able to create an open space, especially when I became a single mother, for my kid to be able to come up to me with anything. And that meant really, really anything. And I figured that it came naturally to me. It was not much of a struggle. And that's where the inspiration really came from everyday conversations around, why do women have breasts and why do men not have breasts, or when he was really little, or, questions around private parts, silly things that kids come up to you with. And that's where the inspiration really came from, that if one can make this conversational, this can be non threatening. If one can do this in a way which is fun while also keeping in mind the seriousness of certain issues, like, say, for example, abuse, one can actually make this accessible to a whole lot of parents who struggle, right? So the book also has issues like separation and divorce, dating after divorce, talking to children about death, which are not issues that you'll find in mainstream parenting books, because those are really about character building or how to get your kids to perform better and a whole lot of other 10 ways to do things kind of things. And I felt like this was needed, and I was met with a lot of encouragement, a lot of push from my friends and my community to say that this is needed, this is a voice that parents need, which is friendly and non-judgmental. That's the story behind unparenting. And while writing the book, you also go through many changes, because you realize that for most issues you don't have very clear answers, but you can only make attempts. So as a writer, as a mom, also it's been a very transformative and humbling journey in that
You're
sense.
also a columnist. You do write, for many publications. You write for Vice. You also write for the Indian Express. So, how do you use, storytelling as a tool for advocacy and social change?
I think the one thing that I try to keep in mind is to make things relatable, because, as a professional, you can very easily slide into technical language, which I feel works well for certain mediums. But for mass mediums, you have to bring in the seriousness of issues, but in a way where people can understand them and also relate to them and feel connected. A lot of work, literary work that has been done on serious issues often can sometimes make feel readers like they are inadequate, that they don't know enough. So one thing I really try to keep alive in my storytelling is the tone of compassion. And in all of the things that I'm relating, this permission for readers to feel like you can revise what you know, you can add more to what you know, that there is acceptance for change, acceptance for saying that I've made mistakes. And I feel like that means that I have to talk a lot about what I've experienced, and that creates a certain kind of connect. At least that's what I hear from people who read me, that we feel like you're sitting right here and you're talking to us, and it makes it very, very personal, very warm. So that's one thing that I try to use, is when you make a story or a narrative about people and their very real fears, their very real vulnerabilities, and take it away from, say, flowery language or verbosity, that can also be very powerful. That can also be very transformative. It doesn't have to be up there. It can be at the level of
Yeah,
conversation.
which you mean is relatable, right? It has to be relatable.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
absolutely. And for
yeah,
things like this, which is so much of a taboo even now in society, where people don't want to
yeah,
open up and talk about it, and you're mostly
yeah.
discouraged to speak about anything that you feel that could lead you into being looked upon or judged. Most people don't
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So,
yeah.
lastly, you've had the opportunity, to speak at very, very prestigious forums like TEDx, and also you've been with UN Women India. What is it that is the key message that you would like to give out in any of these forums that you go in and talk?
To any forum that I'm invited for, and I've been very fortunate to have been invited to really good forums. One can often be led into having opinions that are very strong and can sometimes be polarizing. So the one thing that I try to be mindful of is, especially when you're talking about things like gender or things like violence, one has to understand things through the long lens of history, through the long lens of culture and religion and socialization and evolution. How have we evolved as a species? What are some habits that we are bringing in? Because almost all of my talks and panels are around these areas. So it can be very easy to fall into that trap of I know better and I'm going to tell people what is the right way to think when you're offered a podium and a mic. It feels dangerously powerful. It can feel very exhilarating. So I try and be mindful of bringing in perspectives that are often contrary, but also leaving wiggle room for doubt when people listen to you. Are they left feeling just a little bit uncomfortable? Because I feel like that's important, because that makes people think, that makes people read, that makes people look up resources and be curious. So trying to sort of bring in information with compassion, but also giving in a lot of different perspectives that are not polarized, that bring in complexity, especially for loaded issues that bring in many aspects. So for example, I'll share with you an example. I was called to the UN Women platform way back in 2018, I think. And there is this tendency when you go to platforms like that, which have a very strong mono voice, that you can start saying things that may, for example, appear a little anti-men. There were a lot of men in the audience, and at the minute I stepped on the stage, I realized, I also have to make them feel heard while making them see that they really have the power to support women in the way that is needed right now. But it has to sound like not an us versus them, but a we're in this together. Yeah. So that's what I'm constantly trying to do on stage or writing, that if we have to get ahead, we have to step away from polarization. We have to really look at issues as this belongs to everyone. And that's one thing I keep trying to do over and over again.
Yeah, but lastly, I mean, I think feminism honestly is about equality. It is really not about me and
Yes.
them. And I think that's where people
Yeah.
make this whole mistake, thinking that, what, you're
Yeah.
against men. And of course, we are not. I
Yeah.
mean, I am the mother of a son, and I have often been, pointed out that sometimes I do write where it is very, very pro women. I'm just saying that, most of my writing is about seeking equality. I mean,
Yeah.
things that
Yeah. Yeah.
men take for granted is something that even a woman should.
Absolutely. And those things need to be talked
Yes.
about. They need to be, brought out. But what also needs to be brought out is, how patriarchy has such a strong hold on mindsets. And that takes a little bit of, balancing things out. So, of course, when you're writing, it's different. And when you're speaking and you're talking to everyone, it's different. So I think all perspectives are
So I
needed.
think,
And
Rima,
you're
I
absolutely right.
myself need a course from you on balancing. That's not something I've mastered till now. And thank you
It's
so
not
much
hard.
for being,
It's so hard. You're welcome. It's been a pleasure being here and talking to you.
yeah, thanks a ton. It was wonderful. And look forward to meeting you when I'm in Delhi next.
Yes, yes,
Thanks.
yes, yes. See you, and all the best for all the beautiful, powerful work that you do. And yeah, stay livid is what I'd
You too.
say.
To you, our dearest listeners, you can find us on your favorite streaming services: Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, and of course on all other major streaming services. With loads of love, we are The Mohua Show, where we talk imandari se.